we have one commitment today, and that is to have fun. Will you join us in that commitment? Very good. I have a high value on fun. So Candace, we're creating that, yeah?
I hope so.
Okay, good. So I thought I'd start with a light question. Why are some people happy and others not?
I think that there's about as many answers to that question as there are people. The project is sort of thinking about happiness, but it's thinking about happiness in connection with things like cultivating your character and finding a sense of meaning or purpose in your life. And it really started out of a meditation about unhappiness of a particular kind. Pretty good people who had done everything they thought they were supposed to do to have a full and a happy life. And then there's this like huge hole in the middle of life where the happiness and the sense of meaning were supposed to have been. So we started this project to try to think about how to bring those things together. For me personally, happiness is not as important as the meaning component. Partly, it may just be temperamental. I've never taken a little unhappiness to mean I've gone off the rails, particularly. And I think that if you're alive to a lot of the things going on in the world today, in a certain kind of way, they're not pleasing.
Well, that's another rabbit hole. So I was driving down Damon this morning, going into Bodie, and I came across a billboard above the trains, and it said, "Let us help you find your happy." And it was a real estate development company. I suspect that might not be the kind of happy you're talking about.
Now, our scholars omitted the real estate portion.
Okay.
We were busy thinking about issues about your character and the kind of work people do to try to be better human beings. We were thinking about the kind of immersion in your life you have and the kind of orientation to what you do that you bring to it. And the kind of central theme in this whole research project has been that it's by understanding your life as giving you an opportunity to participate in something bigger and better than just yourself, that you're most likely to find your life coming together in a way that's satisfying and meaningful.
Josiah Royce is one of my great studies. I love reading his work. And, you know, he created the context of the beloved community. And the premise of his work was that if human beings don't have something greater than themselves, essentially they devolve into their neurotic states. Is that what you're finding to be true?
It certainly looks to be the case. But we also are drawing, some of our scholars are really immersed in work by people like Viktor Frankl about how is it that you survive something like Auschwitz, those kinds of things. I mean, if you're not picked for extermination, what kinds of things can give you a sense of resilience when it looks like everything's falling apart around you and there's terrible loss, and it turns out that it's your connectedness to other people that can sometimes help.
You use this word virtue, and it's not a word that I feel like is used all that regularly these days. I would love to know, what do you mean when you use the word virtue?
Well, not the way that the word used to be used in the United States. We're not really super worried about women's behavior. But in particular, I mean, we're talking about acquired states of character, meaning ways of thinking, feeling, and acting that are directed at kind of good generally, common good in particular, because of the virtue theorist we use, instead of just self-actualization, self-satisfaction, success, all these kinds of things. So we're talking about sort of states of character and about the processes by which you acquire, develop, maintain, exercise, aspects of your character. And those aspects of your character get called virtues by a lot of philosophers. The root for it is the Latin word vir, which means strength. And it's about, like any other kind of strength, you partly build it up through resistance, through overcoming things.
I have 4 kids, 20, 17, 8, and 5, and I frequently say that patience is not a virtue I possess. Would that be an appropriate use of the word virtue?
That's an appropriate use of the word virtue.
Okay, good. Much of your work is, from my understanding, tell me if this is correct, is based on Thomas Aquinas.
Yeah.
And there's a great quote by him. It says, "Man cannot live without joy. Therefore, when he is deprived of true spiritual joys, it is necessary that he become addicted to carnal pleasures." And so what I just heard you say is that there is, and certainly this is what I come up against in my work, is this, at times, really almost addictive nature to self-actualization and to what I would call like the small self. And I like the distinction here of joy and spiritual joy. What do you hear in that?
Well, he's talking about a kind of core restlessness in the human heart. And he thinks that really doesn't ever get completely satisfied in the course of leading a human life. But this constant going for whatever looks like it might actually answer to that restlessness is a critical part of, human life generally. And so your spiritual awareness or your spiritual connectedness, which for him is all about community, common good, and connectedness, he's a theologian, to God, is what opens up possibilities for a kind of joy in your life that you wouldn't otherwise have. So he's certainly talking about that. The thing about carnal pleasures is sort of like, look, you're going to go for stuff. You're not alive otherwise. That's a genuine feature of what it is to be thoroughly alive, is a kind of restlessness. Mm-hmm. And so he's thinking that if you don't have a way of orienting that to a higher good, you're going to be constantly looking to satisfy it in things that aren't going to do it. David Foster Wallace, in his commencement address, kind of put it this way: look, if you're going to invest yourself totally in things like your personal appearance and that sort of thing, your beauty, what's going to happen is that you're going to die 1,000 deaths before you die one. Because there's always going to be, if you put it all in power or something, you will never have enough. If you invest it all in a sense of your own intelligence, you are always going to feel stupid and be waiting for people to find out that you're a fraud. It's that kind of thought being expressed, by a guy who's a medieval theologian, basically.
I'm involved in a group at the Harvard Divinity School that is 50 community leaders that lead communities that are highly attractive to millennials and that have sort of a spiritual context to them. And some of the work, some of the qualities that they have unveiled that are appealing to millennials, I definitely put that in air quotes because that word has taken on a whole life of its own, are social impact and accountability. And I think that it's easy in this time and space to use that word millennials and have sort of like a distasteful air to it when it's used. I'm wondering what you find as a university professor around virtue, happiness, and the meaning of life as it relates to what you've seen in your last 25 years at the university.
My students are starved for conversation about this, and they're starved for thinking about it. I get lots of people in ethics classes thinking that surely in such a class we'll get to talk about and listen to each other on these kinds of topics, and we do. And they are hungry for it, really, really hungry for it. And, here they are. They're out away from home, often for the first time, with a different group of people for the first time, in a different kind of competitive environment for the first time. And they're looking for ways to be nurtured in this and to nurture each other in this.
Are they uniquely hungry for this? Do you notice it differently today than you did 10 years ago?
I don't, because I think it's a human thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's a human thing about being at that kind of absolutely crucial transitional moment in your life when you're learning things and making a series of decisions that are going to either open or close all kinds of doors for you for the rest of your maturity. It's an ideal time to think about this stuff.
My 20-year-old and 17-year-old have a very low threshold for doing things that don't matter. And so when you talk about the meaning of life, I feel like my story is that there has been an evolution in the consciousness of humanity that indicates that the meaning of life has maybe not a higher value, but a very different value or a different place in young people's lives.
Yeah, I think one of the things about questions about meaning I'm much more a meaning in life than meaning of life kind of guy, but specific questions about meaning in life, I think, really kind of entered the European and American world, North American and European world, after the World Wars, when there started to be really huge question marks for people. And some traditional sources seemed to have been obliterated. And I think it was a lot of forces together that started to make meaning in that sense, in that term, in that language, a really important question for people.
If so much of our time is dedicated today towards the acquisition of material gain and success and career, I guess I would ask, how do people prioritize meaning in life when there's such a cultural value on success and accumulation and measuring sticks? It seems like we have to sort of assert that meaning in life matters.
I am kind of flat-footed about it. I don't think there's anything wrong at all with wanting to go for success. And I certainly am the last person in the world to tell people that they shouldn't care about material security. I grew up in a circumstance where that was always an issue, actually. And so, paychecks matter in all kinds of ways. But the way that you go about your daily life in almost any kind of a setting can either make you available to having a more meaningful experience or not. And so it's sort of, I was talking to a group of highly motivated and highly successful and super shiny B-school students not long ago about this kind of thing. And for them, something as simple as, being in a high-stress corporate environment and saying hello to people. Especially saying hello to the people who make their lives possible, but you don't usually say hello to people at the desks where they aren't scheduling big meetings, where they're not part of big meetings. Those kinds of things can actually alter the atmosphere of the whole floor. Your coworkers for a while are going to wonder what you're up to. Think it's probably no good, be a little worried because you're talking and in a way that you don't usually talk. But if you just quietly keep it up, it can alter a whole atmosphere on an entire floor of the building, eventually. Little things like that. Just being aware of the humanity of your fellow human beings and kind of letting that be part of how you move around in the world can make a huge difference.
You have been thinking about these things for many years, decades, yes?
Yep.
As you walk on the earth these days, what are you most concerned about, and what are you most encouraged by?
That's a really good question. I'm most concerned about the ease with which people not only just overlook each other, but judge and dismiss each other. And I think that that's really toxic and really hard to recover from. And it does tremendous damage, I think. What I'm most optimistic about is that, in my experience, if you actually just approach your fellow human beings as your fellow human beings, it's practically miraculous. The kind of warmth, honesty, and so on that can just be part of your daily life if you're aware of something other than your internal monologue for, even just a few minutes a day. You can keep yourself busy talking to yourself all day long, but if you can just notice other people around you occasionally, that is enough of an opening for very good things to start happening between you and others in the world. I'm a big believer in actual face-to-face, in the same room with other people, or on the same sidewalk or something, human relationships. I don't think I would have survived without that.
Much of your work talks about self-transcendence. Can you break that down for us? Transcending the self?
Yeah, the easiest way to say it is like if you can just manage to get over yourself. It's true, you may be all that. But the fact that you're all that is not what's going to help you have a good life. It's how you are with other people. It's how you think about the work that you do. It's how you see yourself being able to participate in the lives of people who don't strike you as anywhere near as amazing as you strike yourself on some days.
I'm not as fabulous as my selfies tell me I am.
I don't have selfies.
I grew up in parochial school, and I was thinking about this recently, in large part because my 8-year-old is so enamored with herself, really. And I had the thought, when I was growing up in school, we did a lot of service projects in my school environment. And I don't see that as much anymore. I haven't seen that in my kids' school environment. And my question to you is, or I would say for me what's true is that serving others, being of service to the greater good, serving the needs of humanity is the ultimate way I transcend myself.
It would not surprise me a bit. It's like, I'm a philosopher. We're like notoriously huddled in a corner somewhere having a thought. It's like how we live most of our time. For me, the most important thing is if something that I write or something that I do is useful to somebody else. And if it's, best of all, it's useful in some way I never imagined it could possibly be useful to somebody else. So I'm not even controlling the reception. It's like somebody else is finding something there that I would never have thought might be there as a resource for somebody. I agree with you.
When you and I were visiting last week, you mentioned that your home is what I heard you say was an available space and open to kids in the neighborhood that may have wants and needs. And that seems so unusual these days.
We live on the south side. We could not afford to buy in Hyde Park. They moved south there. And there's a lot of kids in the neighborhood, and we know several of them. We know one family pretty well. And like if the kids need something, they just come to the back door and knock. I mean, a sandwich, somebody to sit and talk to, whatever. And that, it is, of course. And we both, I think, and my husband's here, I think we both have this sense that, like, if there's hungry kids, that becomes the most important thing at that moment.
My thought is that when we create an environment or culture where the preservation of the individual self carries the highest value, it can be very challenging to indicate to our fellow human beings that I need help. It can be very prohibitive to even say, can you help me?
Yeah, I mean, the kids are more likely to say, do you have any cookies? That's the more usual thing that happens at the back door. But that happens because they know that my husband, there's usually some cookies. And if there aren't, there will be tomorrow. I mean, it's like that. But I actually think that their individual selves are completely precious. And I don't know how to engage with my fellow human beings without seeing them as precious beings. I mean, the word, I would rather use a word like sacred than a word like dignity to talk about what's important about every human being. I mean, there's an amazingly precious, utterly unique creature in front of you. So that kind of emphasis on the individual, I'm a big fan. I like that. The me, not so much.
What do you love and appreciate most about Hank?
Husband. How long have we got?
I asked her at the beginning, I said, okay, favorite color? Nope, don't get that. Favorite animal? Nope. And I said, can you work with me, Candace? And she was like, I have a favorite human, it's Hank.
It's true. 30 some odd years, we sort of grow each other up. And I think the thing is that we're very fortunate. We have the kind of relationship that, as he put it, describing it to a mutual friend this morning over coffee, we can be together and completely relaxed at the same time. And kind of alert and alive to each other and completely at ease. And I think it's just this feeling that it's almost like in your bones connected to another person. And I don't know that there's a way to describe that in terms of qualities or something. When somebody knows you really, really well and just flat out loves you, there's not even a thought between you and that love. It's just there. To get to nurture, build, and live that way with another human being is an amazing gift. It's really incredible.
When I felt comfortable texting him like 70 times a day. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is the guy. I'm not even worried what he thinks. So that would be my example. What is your highest goal for this project? You know, if you could say, gosh, if this body of work produced, forget what the foundation expects, but you as this brilliant being on the planet that has devoted your life to the well-being of humanity, what is your highest goal for this body of work?
The highest goal, I think, is that it be ongoing through the work and the connections that were made between the scholars. It's a network project, so what we we wanted to have a very powerful humanistic focus, obviously, but we wanted to do it by getting disciplinary scholars working in their disciplines, doing the things that they're amazingly good at, reading each other's work in progress, right, as it was going along, and then taking part in how different projects took shape. The ongoing life of that network, through the bonds that got formed in this very trusting, very supportive, very good-humored work environment over the past couple of years, that kind of thing feels really important. And the ongoing work of the young people who took part, younger scholars, who took part in summer seminars with us across the disciplines, gathered together, trying to learn how to think together outside of silos and stuff, and talk together and support each other. I just want to see people's work to continue to be empowered and enabled by the stuff that we've been doing, and to grow and develop in ways that we didn't know even how to have an imagination for. That's, to my mind, what a really good network project does, and I think we've had one, which is unbelievably great.
Is there anything particular of what that body of scholars have done that jumps out at you? Like, wow, that really surprised me, or...
Yes. A theologian from Notre Dame who works on Aquinas called Jean Porter, who's done completely impeccable scholarly work on Aquinas and medieval philosophy generally her entire career, and is this person from the Texas-Oklahoma border who is one tough, beautiful, gorgeous, flat-out scholar. And this very quiet, very reserved psychologist who's a developmental psychologist who'd been doing this huge research project on infant food preferences, showing that the way that very little humans start learning to discriminate between food they like and food they don't like, right? I mean, her scholarly project on infant food preferences and how social and communal and how much about belonging those things are. Jean is now using work on infant food preferences as a way of trying to think about the roots of certain kinds of virtues. Right? Never, these people would never have met. They never would have read a word that the other wrote. I mean, it never would have, that kind of thing, where it really becomes possible to use the resources of excellent work in one field to enrich work in a completely unrelated field. That sort of thing happened several times in the course of the project and was really surprising and kind of completely invigorating.
And what is the end game or the objective of someone who is studying infant food preferences?
I mean, what she's doing is trying to, she's really interested in the depth of the sociability of human beings. And so one of the things that you are sometimes doing, if you've got that kind of focus, I mean, the place where I've been reading a bunch of work on it is in language acquisition. But if you've got that kind of focus, what you're really interested in understanding is the way that these very little people are busily making connections to the other human beings in their lives and learning how to be a member of, in the first instance, a family group, but then another sort of a community. And that kind of deep sociability is right at the core of the kind of work that I think it's important to do about connections between virtue, happiness, and meaning. Because I think there's a lot of richness for everyone in thinking and working on those things. But she's trying to think about just how social we are. We're so social that, you know, the way that we respond to various kinds of things about food revealed us deeply by the time we're 6 or 7 or 8 months old.
Wow. And like infant food preferences, holy smokes, who knew there was a whole world there? What got the scholars to you? How'd you select them?
By paying attention to the work that people had done and were famous for doing, by asking people I trusted about the most promising younger scholars they knew that I wouldn't know because they're still just emerging. And then by paying very close attention to whether or not these were people who were likely to be open to working across disciplinary boundaries or across subdisciplinary boundaries in empirical psychology.
So you transcended the self.
I sent emails.
Or you galvanized people who were willing to transcend the self.
I sent emails and said, look, these are the questions I'm really interested in. Would you be willing to come? Here's the structure. Would you be willing to do this? And virtually everyone said yes.
And why do you think that was? Why do you think they were so drawn to the subject matter?
Partly because there were germs of it already emerging in the work that they were doing. Partly because it didn't have some of the drawbacks that interdisciplinary projects sometimes have. It wasn't like we were going to ask a philosopher to design an experiment over for a social scientist. It wasn't like we were going to ask somebody who worked in cognitive neuroscience to fuss over a passage of philosophy and fix it. We were really wanting people to play to their strengths, but to share the wisdom that they had from their own fields and bring that to bear in looking at work that was different. And they were willing to give it a go. So, they're heroes.
As we sit here and consider applying your body of work to our personal lives, to our individual lives, what are some of the immediate practices that you would recommend we each move towards to invoke virtue, happiness, and an expanded sense of the meaning, or meaning in life?
I think even if you have to have it be an act of make-believe or something, like some of my B school students did, operate on the presumption that you're moving around in potential small communities of your fellow human beings, and operate on the assumption that, like you, everyone would rather have it be the case that where they showed up, they were sort of welcome and kind of appreciated, and that nobody actually wants to be, annoying and unpleasant. That that's sort of that people are actually sort of quietly relieved and delighted if you just approach them as though they're your fellow human beings. This little trick works wonders.
It seems like it's a particularly appropriate time in our society to practice that, in a time where we've become quite divided, quite polarized, quite isolated, quite fictitious to one another.
It also really helps to not be too alarmed by difference. I think whenever you discern an actual difference, there's a very strong tendency to want to make whatever seems other be somehow inferior or something. If you can actually get to a point where difference is actually sort of exciting, and it's not a puzzle that you're supposed to solve, it's not like a huge challenge to your being or something, it's actually just difference. And it's okay if you can't think, imagine, or feel your way into being someone else. The fact that you can't makes it more likely that you'll get company, right? Like somebody who's not just another you, sort of walking around there, but actually somebody who has a different kind of thing to contribute to the world that you're sharing with them. That, I think, really helps.
how does this concept of God or faith play into your work? I mean, when I was thinking about us getting together, one of the articles that I read was sort of how unique your body of work was by virtue of invoking that specific dimension of the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, we're interested in self-transcendence and in attachment to some larger good, and one of the most obvious places where that occurs is in religion. So we had people who work on in Jewish studies, we had an Islamic scholar, we had a couple Christian theologians, we had people who work with Confucian and Buddhism, things which are not quite in the same way. They're not theistic. We also had social psychologists who work on things like the ongoingness of a family, right? Or on ways in which people can connect to something larger than themselves by imagining that their lives were made possible by the struggles of people who came before, and through a determination to kind of carry good forward, connect themselves to a future. So that kind of thing as well. So sometimes God plays in because there are religious views about our relations to God that put us into a context where we're invited somehow to participate in a particular kind of a community or with relation to God in a particular sort of way. And those are very distinctive ways of doing it. And they've got an awful lot of experience.
Does it occur for you as a challenge or problematic that religion in America is in a state of transition?
I was just at a big conference last week where people were alternately sort of strangely optimistic and deeply demoralized about religion in America and its place in democracy, and sort of lots of different views. The sociologists reported that actually although there are many fewer people who are religiously active. Mm-hmm. I mean, they go to synagogue, they go to church, they have a regular practice, something like that. There's a lot fewer people who are active in those kinds of ways than there were before, that it was still the case that the vast majority of Americans, at least, understood themselves as having something like a spiritual sense and holding on to something like that. And that they might get it in experiences of the natural world, they might get it in experiences with their fellow human beings, they might get it in lots of ways. So, I don't know, religious attendance seems to be going down. Some kind of belief in there being some spiritual aspect of human life that still seems there. And even non-believers have sources of a sense of sort of possible wonder, those kinds of things. I mean, they don't assume that that means that it's spiritual, but it's like they're alive, which is pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm. We have 15 minutes remaining and would love to open it up for Q&A. So I know that we have some really brilliant Humanities Festival people that will help us do that, and there will be 2 mic runners. So go ahead and raise your hands, and we will bring a mic to questions.
Thank you very much. One comment and then a question. The comment is your remarks about the power of the collaborative nature of the project and the people who are involved was echoed by one of the Humanities Festival programs yesterday, The Gig Economy by Kathy Davidson, saying that actually a lot of that power could be in effect with just the people in this room or any group of people. It isn't necessarily limited to experts in the field. That collaboration itself is creative and remarkably so. But the question is, You commented on the power of simply greeting people in the office on the floor, changing the atmosphere of the entire floor by saying good morning. That seems to me a kind of form of random acts of kindness without any goods actually being exchanged. They're all verbal or smiles. If you could design a program to encourage that as, let's just say, a Chicago activity or virtue, I'm actually dead serious in this. How would you do that? So that it became something that you do in Chicago to greet the bus driver or the security guard who's standing there, or the person, you smile at the person who brings you your food. How would you do that? How would you make that a virtue of Chicago?
I mean, an excellent question. And I mean, where I live in Chicago, it already is a virtue of Chicago. My brother-in-law was visiting, I live on the south side. My brother-in-law was visiting us a few weeks ago. He's from San Francisco. To forget about it. I mean, but he noticed as he was walking to where we live that if he said hello to anybody on the street, they said hello. And they kind of meant that. So there was this automatic sense that you were moving around in a human world. I always say hello. I mean, it's a little thing. I mean, I would hope that it could get more publicized, that actually this is a pretty human city, much more than any place on the West Coast I've ever seen. And I've been up and down the West Coast a lot, most of my life before coming here. And so I would, rather than design a program, but I would, brand it. Like, that's how things are here.
Well, I like the idea of also us as Chicagoans developing a counter-narrative of Chicago. There's such a strong narrative of Chicago that I don't think is always accurately reflected. I love that idea.
Hi. First of all, I wanted to tell you how moved I was about your words in regard to your husband, having just lost mine this past year, and having had the same sort of relationship. I hope you never have to experience the loss. You keep him for a very long time. It's not really a question. It is a question. I went to see Skin of Our Teeth by Thornton Wilder, and I've written it down because it's a quote that I think is contrary to what we've been saying today, but it was a philosophical statement, and I'm wondering what you would have said to Wilder. And the quote is, "My advice to you is not to ask whither or why, but just to enjoy the ice cream while still on your plate." What do you say?
That episodic enjoyment of ice cream is pretty great, but there is not enough ice cream possible to actually make a life out of that.
Any other questions? Hi, I have a question. You just spoke about attachment to some larger good, and then said even non-believers have a sense of the possible wonder. Don't all people have a sense of the possible wonder, which would then minimize the obligation to believe in a higher being?
I don't think anybody's obliged to believe in a higher being. I think a lot of people take it that they've got good grounds to believe in a higher being. And so they believe in a higher being. I don't think that there's, any sense that it's impossible to lead an incredibly rich and full life that makes an enormous amount of good possible for other people, whether or not, no matter what your views on those matters happen to be.
Thank you for the presentation. You mentioned earlier that you find that your students hunger for these meaningful conversations. Possibly you have a skewed sample. You're dealing with super bright young people in one of America's premier universities. Even if we go to other universities, there are thousands upon thousands of people of the same age who don't have university education. And in fact, the person who lives in the White House said during his campaign, I love people who don't have college education. Two-part question, do you think that young people who don't have the advantage of, or the experience of university education hunger for the same conversation? And if so, what means do we have as a society to get it to them?
Excellent question. I think humans hunger for that conversation. And I think that it's really, really important to provide opportunities to have it. And I don't know of a single way to do that for people. I wish that it was part of public school education, that there were opportunities for this. I wish that it was part of every youth sport program in any community organization anywhere to have those kinds of conversations. I wish that it was absolutely automatic to try to think about what the point is of things and what's at stake in things pretty often, and to get in the habit of doing that. I don't think it's just my students who have this. I've taught in lots of different kinds of places and met lots of different kinds of university students, but also lots of different kinds of people who are never going to go to university. And I take it that the claim that the human heart is restless and wants to actually explore that is true, not just kind of an interesting way to think about us. So I don't know much about how to design programs for it, but I think it's not that hard to build it in. It's not that hard to build it into higher education teaching, even if what you're teaching is something like organic chem or programming or something. You don't have to be teaching ethics to build in some of this capacity. And I think it would be pretty straightforward to build it into elementary school education and secondary school education as well. It would just require having that be something that the society valued enough to sort of push for.
We do have a microphone up in the balcony. If you have any questions up there, want to raise your hand?
Hi, I've got a quick question. I'm just curious how you feel about social media and technology right now. Do you feel like they're a positive force or a negative force? Or do you think that it's something that we may eventually understand how to use effectively?
I love it. Sorry, Candace.
That's all right. I think it kind of depends on how you're using it, whether it's a positive force or a negative force. There's a ton of studies that show that it tends to make people actually paradoxically vastly more isolated than they were before. The jokes about people sitting across the table from each other texting each other. I don't let them have screens in my classrooms, partly because of that. You actually need to say hello to a human instead. So I think that seems to be an unfortunate effect. I think it's a little weird to walk around in the world and have everybody staring at like a device. That strikes me as just, I'm happy that I'm old enough that seems strange. I'm hoping it'll just keep seeming strange. But I think it really depends on how you use it and what you're using it for. And I mean, it's got incredibly powerful, positive potential for actually doing certain kinds of community building and making certain kinds of social movement possible.
Next question.
Hi, thank you for your lovely talk. I was wondering what your opinion was of the kind of popularization of happiness or moves that help you become happy and just ease your mind that's permeating through elementary schools. I teach in a school where we have daily meditation after lunch to change our state from recess to the afternoon. Just what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know enough about the programs to know what I think. I mean, I think it's really important to help people learn how to be with themselves and be kind of quiet. That strikes me as profoundly good. So in that way, that sounds great. The way that a lot of the happiness stuff floats for older people is more like more isolated in a not very good way, I think. There are all of these strategies for just kind of like making it possible to insulate yourself sufficiently that you're not quite so raw to the world as you move through it, and you've got some defenses. I'm in favor of sensible defenses, personal boundaries, these kinds of things. I like those. But if what happiness means is putting some sort of a cocoon around yourself in such a way that you feel affirmed by and satisfied by as much as possible, I don't think it's going to work very well. Now, most classrooms are really densely social spaces for kids, and there's so much other kinds of stuff going on that I'm assuming that it's going to kind of depend on the way that that is integrated by real educators like you into the whole rest of everything that's going on for those kids.
I would like to throw in another variable about happiness, meaning in life, and that is how we portray gratitude, how we teach gratitude, how we spread gratitude in this very isolated world at times. I'd like your thoughts about that.
I think gratitude and humility are really important, actually. And I think that they help each other. That having an appropriate, like a sense of your own place and size and limits, and an ability to appreciate how much of you is made possible by the lives of other people. I think that both of those things are sort of profoundly important in life.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you. I was a guidance counselor in elementary school, and I was attending some courses at a church that were just complimentary. And something that has changed my life considerably was that the social worker who was giving his time said, look for the dimple instead of the pimple. And I've used it and passed through it today. As I walked out to go to the washroom, I said to the two women there, were sitting there, I said, oh, purple, look at how pretty. And she said to me, I love your jacket, But it's so simple, and it's so positive, and so easy and wonderful to make yourself feel good by giving to someone else.
Absolutely.
That does conclude our program. Thank you again for joining us today and for the entire festival. Some of the last programs. So.
Thank you.